The wind moved slowly across the red dunes of Kareth 9, carrying grains of metallic sand that whispered against the shattered remains of vehicles and armor. The battlefield had gone quiet hours ago, but silence did not mean peace. Silence here simply meant that the machines had stopped shooting long enough for the wounded to notice how badly things had gone. Elias Ward lay on his back beside the twisted hull of a crashed troop carrier, staring at a sky that looked far too beautiful for a place where so many people had just tried to eliminate each other. The atmosphere of Kareth 9 refracted starlight into pale violet streaks that drifted like rivers across the darkness. If he ignored the pain in his chest and the smell of burned circuitry, it almost felt like a peaceful evening. Unfortunately, ignoring the pain in his chest was difficult. His armor's medical display blinked weakly near his collar. Survival probability, 3.1%. Optimistic, Elias muttered. He tapped the display with a gloved finger. The number did not change. Machines, he had learned, were stubborn about statistics. Somewhere far above, a small rescue drone buzzed through the sky, scanning for life signals. A soft mechanical voice spoke through his helmet. Human soldier detected. Beacon request acknowledged. Activating recovery protocol. Elias stared up at the purple sky and slowly reached for the beacon control. Then he turned it off. The drone paused overhead for a moment, as if confused. Beacon signal lost, it reported politely, before drifting away in search of someone who was slightly less doomed. Elias watched it disappear. Good luck to the next guy, he said. Breathing hurt now. Every inhale felt like dragging glass through his lungs, and his ribs had clearly decided to stop cooperating with the rest of his skeleton. He shifted slightly and instantly regretted it. Note to self, he whispered. Next war, bring a better chest. A distant explosion echoed somewhere across the desert, probably a delayed reactor meltdown. Kareth 9 had been full of those all week. Humans had come here to stop an alien mining syndicate from claiming the planet's energy crystals. The aliens had come here to stop humans from interrupting their perfectly profitable mining operation. Both sides had been extremely committed to their arguments. Elias coughed, and the inside of his helmet briefly flashed a warning. Internal bleeding. Critical. Well, that seems rude, he said. The wind shifted again. At first, he thought the tall shape approaching through the drifting sand was just another piece of battlefield debris moving in the storm. But debris rarely walked with such quiet balance. A figure emerged from the haze. Tall, graceful, armored in dark metallic plates that caught the faint violet glow of the sky. She moved like someone who knew exactly where every step should fall, even across unstable ground littered with broken machines. Elias blinked slowly. Great, he murmured. Hallucinations. The figure stopped a few meters away. She studied him with sharp, calm eyes. Her face looked almost human. Too smooth, too still, but undeniably familiar in shape. Dark hair moved gently in the wind, revealing the long, elegant ears that extended from the sides of her head. Alien. Definitely alien. Elias raised a hand weakly. Hello, he said. If you're here to finish me off, I should mention I'm already halfway through the process. The alien woman tilted her head slightly, examining him the way a scientist might examine an unusual animal that had somehow wandered into the laboratory. You are dying, she said calmly. Your observational skills are impressive, Elias replied. Do you also solve mysteries on the weekends? She stepped closer. The markings on her armor glowed faintly in shifting patterns, symbols Elias had never seen before. Her eyes moved across his damaged suit, analyzing the injuries with quiet precision. You refused your rescue drone, she said. Elias shrugged as much as his broken ribs allowed. It seemed like the polite thing to do. The alien frowned slightly. Polite? Yeah, Elias said. Dragging a medical ship across a war zone for a guy who's basically a decorative corpse seemed inconsiderate. The alien stared at him for several seconds. Then she asked, Are all humans this strange? Elias considered the question. Not all of us, he said. Some are much worse. For the first time, something like amusement flickered in the alien woman's expression. She knelt beside him, studying him more closely now. Up close, Elias noticed something unsettling about her presence. It wasn't threatening exactly. It was more like standing next to a quiet storm that hadn't decided whether to rain yet. What is your name, human? she asked. Elias Ward, he said. She nodded once. I am Sylva. Elias tried to sit up slightly, failed, and settled for raising one eyebrow. Well, Sylva, he said, I appreciate you stopping by to confirm that I'm dying. It really clears up a lot of medical confusion. Sylva ignored the sarcasm. Her gaze had become thoughtful now, almost curious. You are aware that death is imminent, she said. Oh, absolutely, Elias replied. The suit keeps sending helpful reminders. She was silent for a long moment. The wind moved across the battlefield again, lifting small spirals of glowing sand into the air. Then Sylva made a decision, and Elias Ward had absolutely no idea that his very long life was about to begin. Sylva remained kneeling beside the injured human, the wind brushing softly across the battlefield as if the planet itself had grown tired of the war. Elias watched her with the dull patience of someone who had already accepted that the universe was finished with him. He blinked slowly. You're still here, he said. Yes. That's surprising, Elias replied. Most people leave when the dying part becomes obvious. Sylva studied him carefully, her eyes moving across the cracked surface of his armor. The suit had once been a sleek piece of military engineering designed to withstand radiation storms and plasma fire. Now it looked like someone had attempted to open it with explosives. You are severely damaged, she said. Your bedside manner is incredible, Elias muttered. Her gaze shifted to the faint medical display flickering beside his collar. The alien symbols on her wrist device lit up as she activated it. A thin beam of blue light scanned across his body, passing through armor, bone, and tissue. Elias watched the light pass through him. That thing better not explode, he said. I'm having enough problems already. It will not explode, Sylva replied calmly. That's exactly what exploding devices usually say. The scanning beam faded. Sylva's expression did not change, but Elias noticed the faint tightening of her jaw. You will die within minutes, she said. Ah, Elias said. So the situation is improving. Sylva looked at him again, this time with something closer to confusion. You are aware of your condition, yet you continue making jokes. Elias considered that. Well, he said, crying seemed like a lot of effort. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The battlefield stretched endlessly around them, silent except for the distant hum of drifting drones searching for survivors. Sylva turned her gaze toward the horizon, where the shattered remains of a human artillery cannon still smoldered. Your species is strange, she said quietly. Elias gave a tired smile. That's actually one of our better qualities. Sylva looked back at him. You refused rescue. Correct. Why? Elias shifted slightly and immediately regretted it. Pain rippled through his chest like electricity. Because I've seen what the medical ships look like right now, he said after catching his breath. They're full of people who still have a chance. You also have a chance. 3%, Elias replied. Sylva tilted her head. You know this number? My suit told me. She considered that information. And you trust the judgment of a machine? Elias sighed. Normally no, he said, but when the machine is inside my chest cavity, it tends to be pretty accurate. Sylva remained silent for several seconds. Her people had fought humans before, but she had never spoken to one like this. Most soldiers either attacked her immediately or attempted to flee. This one simply lay there making jokes about his own death. It was unusual. Elias noticed her staring. If you're trying to figure out what kind of idiot I am, he said, the answer is a fairly standard one. Sylva ignored the comment. You accepted death easily, she said. Elias looked back up at the sky. The violet stars were drifting slowly behind thin layers of alien clouds. I wouldn't say easily, he said, but I've had worse mornings. Sylva frowned slightly. You measure time strangely. That's because humans invented Mondays. Sylva had no idea what that meant. She leaned forward slightly, studying his face more closely now. Your heart rate is slowing, she said. Is that bad? Yes. Good to know. A soft mechanical chirp came from Elias's armor. Life support, failure in progress. Well, Elias sighed. That sounds official. Sylva looked down at him for a long moment. The wind moved across the battlefield again, stirring the red dust into drifting clouds around them. Human Elias Ward, she said. That's me. If I offered you survival, would you accept it? Elias blinked slowly. That depends, he said. On what? On whether survival involves becoming part of a science experiment. Sylva did not answer immediately. Instead, she extended her left hand and activated a thin blade that slid silently from the armor along her wrist. Elias raised an eyebrow. Okay, he said carefully. That definitely feels like the beginning of a science experiment. Sylva looked at the blade, then at him. My people possess a biological gift, she said. That sentence worries me. Our blood carries regenerative properties. Elias stared at her. You're telling me your blood can fix this? Yes. Elias thought about that for a moment. Is there a catch? Sylva did not answer. Elias squinted at her. There's definitely a catch. Yes. Of course there is. Sylva hesitated. For the first time since she had approached him, uncertainty flickered across her calm expression. If I give you my blood, she said slowly, your life will no longer belong entirely to you. Elias exhaled. Well, he said, that already sounds like military service. Sylva almost smiled. Almost. Then she raised the blade and sliced cleanly across her palm. Dark blood shimmered in the strange light of the alien sky. Elias watched it drip slowly onto the red sand. Well, he said weakly, this is definitely not how I expected my day to end. The dark liquid gathered slowly in Sylva's palm, thicker than ordinary blood and faintly luminous in the violet light of Carith-9's sky. Elias watched it with the cautious attention of someone who had already survived several questionable medical procedures during his military career. That, he said weakly, looks extremely illegal. Sylva did not seem concerned about the legal implications. It will repair your body, she said. Elias looked at the blood again. It shimmered strangely, like liquid metal mixed with starlight. Right, he murmured. And the side effects? There are many. Elias sighed. I appreciate the honesty. The wind carried a soft hiss across the dunes. Far away, a wrecked transport finally gave up its remaining power cells and collapsed with a dull, metallic groan. Sylva leaned closer. Your heart is failing, she said quietly. That seems rude of it. She ignored the comment and gently tilted his head upward. Elias suddenly realized that the alien warrior was far stronger than she looked. Her movements were precise, effortless. You must drink, she said. Elias squinted at her. You're sure about this? Yes, because I've seen alien horror movies, he said. This is exactly how those start. Sylva looked puzzled. What is a horror movie? Something I'm beginning to live through. His breathing grew shallow. The pain in his chest had changed now, becoming distant and cold. Sylva noticed. You are fading, she said. Elias gave a small nod. Well, he said quietly, this has been a surprisingly interesting conversation. Sylva hesitated. For a brief moment, she considered walking away. The blood drinker caste did not interfere in foreign wars. Saving a human soldier would create complications she did not need. But the battlefield was silent, and the human lying in the sand had accepted death with an oddly calm sense of humor. She lowered her hand. Drink, she said again. Elias looked at the shimmering blood and sighed. If this gives me tentacles, he muttered, I'm filing a complaint. Sylva pressed her bleeding palm gently against his mouth. At first, nothing happened. Then a single drop of her blood touched his tongue. The universe exploded. Heat surged through Elias's body like a reactor core igniting inside his veins. His spine arched violently as every nerve screamed at once. Oh! The rest of the sentence dissolved into a sound that frightened a nearby reconnaissance drone. Energy flooded his bloodstream. The alien enzymes spread through him like wildfire, seeking damaged cells and rewriting them with ruthless efficiency. His ribs snapped back into alignment with sharp cracking sounds. His lungs expanded painfully as shredded tissue reformed itself. The medical display on his armor flickered wildly. Critical damage, reversing. Critical damage, reversing. Critical damage, reversing. Elias grabbed the sand with both hands as the transformation surged through him. This, he gasped, this is... His body convulsed again. Sylva remained calm, holding him steady while the process continued. She had seen this reaction before. Regeneration was never gentle. Elias's vision blurred. The violet sky fractured into spinning patterns as the alien blood rewrote his failing biology. For a moment he was certain he had died. Then suddenly, silence. The pain vanished. Elias inhaled deeply. Air filled his lungs easily, smoothly, as if they had never been damaged at all. He blinked several times. Then he slowly sat up. His armor creaked slightly as he moved. Sylva watched him carefully. Elias raised his hands in front of his face, turning them slowly. Everything felt different, stronger, clearer. He could hear distant winds across the dunes. He could smell the faint metallic scent of cooling starship hulls kilometers away. He looked down at his chest. The armor was still cracked, but beneath it his body felt whole. "Okay," he said quietly. Sylva waited. Elias looked at her. "Either I'm alive again," he said, "or this is the most convincing afterlife I've ever seen." "You are alive," Sylva replied. Elias touched his ribs experimentally. They didn't hurt. He coughed once. His lungs worked perfectly. He stared at her. "What did you do to me?" Sylva slowly wiped the remaining blood from her palm. "My blood has altered your cellular structure," she said. Elias blinked. "That sounds extremely permanent." "It is." He stood up slowly. The movement felt effortless, almost weightless. "Well," he said after a moment, "I have to admit, this is an improvement over dying." Sylva nodded once. "There is something you must understand." Elias raised a finger. "Before we get to that," he jumped once experimentally. He landed easily. Then he looked at her again. "I feel incredible," he said. "Is this what exercise feels like?" Sylva ignored the question. "My blood has made you immortal." Elias froze. The wind moved across the dunes again. "Hold on," he said slowly. Sylva waited. Elias pointed at himself. "You mean me?" "Yes." He looked down at his hands again, then back at her, then at the battlefield. "Well," he said thoughtfully, "that seems like a fairly large life decision to make without paperwork." Sylva studied him calmly. "There is also a cost." Elias sighed. "Of course there is." Elias stood in the red sand for a long moment, slowly rotating his shoulders as if testing a newly installed set of parts. The cracked armor shifted slightly over his chest, but beneath it everything felt intact. No sharp pain, no collapsing lungs, no feeling that gravity was trying to fold him into the ground. He inhaled deeply. The air filled his lungs like a clean stream after a long drought. "Well," he said eventually, "that is deeply suspicious." Sylva watched him with the calm patience of someone observing an experiment. "You were dying moments ago," she said. "Yes," Elias replied. "I noticed. And now you are not." "Yes, I noticed that too." He bent slightly and picked up a broken piece of metal from the sand. It had once been part of the troop carrier's outer plating. Normally, it would have required two hands. He lifted it easily with one. Elias stared at the metal. Then he looked at Sylva. "Okay," he said slowly. "I'm beginning to suspect something unusual has happened." Sylva crossed her arms. "My blood has reconstructed your damaged cells," she said. "Your body is now capable of repairing itself indefinitely." Elias nodded thoughtfully. "Indefinitely is a long time." "Yes." "Like, extremely long." "Yes." He tossed the piece of metal aside and rubbed the back of his neck. "Just to clarify," he said, "when you say indefinitely, are we talking about several decades, or the kind of indefinitely that involves watching mountains slowly erode?" Sylva did not hesitate. "The second one," Elias blinked. "Right." The wind carried a faint echo of distant engines across the dunes. Somewhere far beyond the horizon, automated war drones were still cleaning the battlefield. Elias took another deep breath. "I have to admit," he said, "I expected death to be quieter than this." "You are not dead." "Yes, that part still feels strange." He turned and looked across the broken battlefield. The wreckage of human machines and alien craft stretched for kilometers. "I was extremely certain I was finished," he said. Sylva stepped closer. "You were." Elias looked back at her. "Well," he said, "thank you for the upgrade." Sylva did not smile. There is something else you must understand. Elias immediately pointed a finger at her. I knew there was a catch. Sylva tilted her head slightly. A catch? Yes, Elias said. There is always a catch with immortality. Movies have taught me this. I do not know what movies are. They are warnings disguised as entertainment. Sylva ignored the comment. The blood drinker caste does not create immortals without consequence. Elias folded his arms. Of course not. She looked directly into his eyes now. Our blood binds lives together. Elias waited. Sylva continued. When I gave you my blood, I formed a bond. A bond, Elias repeated. Yes. Elias nodded slowly. That word sounds suspicious. Sylva spoke calmly. Our lifespans are now connected. Elias blinked. I'm going to need more information. If one of us dies, the other will eventually follow. Elias stared at her. That seems inconvenient. There is more. Elias sighed. I knew there would be. Sylva looked at him carefully. Our pain is shared. Elias paused. Shared how? If you are injured, I will feel it. Elias raised an eyebrow. That seems rude. If I am injured, you will feel it. Elias froze. The wind shifted again, lifting spirals of red dust around them. So let me make sure I understand this, he said slowly. Sylva waited. You turned me immortal, Elias continued. Yes. And now we are biologically connected. Yes. And if either of us gets hurt, the other will feel it. Elias stared at her. Then he looked at the sky, then back at her again. Well, he said eventually, this is the most aggressive friendship I've ever had. Sylva seemed slightly confused. Friendship? Elias rubbed his face. Look, where I come from, sharing pain with someone is usually a relationship milestone. Sylva considered this information. In my culture, she said, it is called a blood bond. Elias pointed toward her. That sounds significantly more serious. It is. Elias paced slowly across the sand, testing his new strength. Okay, he said. Hypothetical situation. Sylva waited. If I accidentally fall down some stairs, you would heal quickly, Sylva said. And you would feel the pain? Yes. Elias nodded thoughtfully. That seems like a design flaw. Sylva crossed her arms. The bond is sacred. Sacred design flaws are still flaws. She studied him carefully. You are unusually calm about this. Elias shrugged. Well, about 10 minutes ago, I was dead, he said. This already feels like an improvement. Sylva looked toward the distant horizon. There is another part of the bond. Elias groaned quietly. I knew you weren't finished. Sylva spoke softly now. If you die naturally one day, Elias waited. I will feel the moment you leave. The wind fell silent around them. Elias looked at her again. Even if that happens centuries from now? Yes. He exhaled slowly. Well, he said after a moment, that sounds emotionally inconvenient. Sylva did not answer. For the first time since they met, Elias noticed something in her expression that looked almost like regret. He watched her quietly for a few seconds. Then he pointed at the distant battlefield. So, he said, since we're now connected for eternity. Sylva looked at him. Do we at least get dinner first? Sylva did not answer Elias's question about dinner immediately. Instead, she turned toward the distant ridge of broken black stone that bordered the battlefield. Beyond it, the desert of Kareth 9 stretched into miles of silent dunes and buried alien ruins. We should leave, she said calmly. Elias followed her gaze. That's fair, he said. Most places where people tried to vaporize each other for 6 hours usually lose their charm afterward. Sylva began walking across the sand with quiet, steady steps. Elias looked down at his cracked armor, brushed a handful of red dust from his shoulder, and followed her. At first, the walk felt strange. His body moved easily, almost too easily. The fatigue that should have been crushing him simply wasn't there. He stretched his arms as he walked. You know, he said thoughtfully, I feel like I could run across this entire desert without stopping. You probably could, Sylva replied. That seems irresponsible. Sylva did not respond. They walked for several minutes in silence while the wind swept thin lines across the dunes. The wreckage of the battlefield slowly faded behind them. Elias eventually cleared his throat. So, he said, now that we are apparently blood-bound immortals? Sylva glanced at him. Yes? What exactly happens next? You adapt. That sounds suspiciously vague. Sylva continued walking. You will notice changes in your senses, she said. Your strength will increase. Your body will repair damage rapidly. Elias nodded slowly. That explains something. What? He pointed ahead without looking. There is a reconnaissance drone buried under that sand dune. Sylva stopped walking. You cannot see through the sand. I'm not seeing it, Elias said. He tapped his ear. I'm hearing it. Sylva turned toward the dune. A faint mechanical vibration hummed beneath the sand. She looked back at him. You detected that from 30 meters away. Elias shrugged. I told you. Suspicious. They resumed walking. A few minutes later, Elias suddenly stopped. Sylva turned. What is wrong? Elias frowned slightly. I just felt something. Pain? Yes. Sylva glanced down at her leg. A small crack ran across one of the armored plates near her knee. I slipped on a stone, she said. Elias pointed at her leg. Your clumsiness just injured me. It was not clumsiness. You literally tripped. The stone was poorly positioned. Elias stared at her. That's not how stones work. They continued walking. The sky slowly darkened as the violet stars brightened above the desert. A long silver moon began rising behind the dunes. After a while, Elias spoke again. Can I ask something? Yes. How long do your people usually live? Sylva considered the question. Several centuries. Elias nodded slowly. That's quite a retirement plan. For blood drinkers, it is normal. Right, Elias said. But humans usually start complaining when meetings last longer than an hour. Sylva gave him a curious look. You speak about time as if it were an enemy. Elias thought about that. Well, he said, when you only get 80 or 90 years, time becomes very competitive. They walked another 100 meters. Then Elias suddenly stopped again. Sylva turned, slightly annoyed now. What is it this time? Elias looked at the horizon. There's a transport ship coming. Sylva narrowed her eyes. There is nothing in the sky. Not yet, Elias said. He pointed upward. But I can hear the engine ignition. Sylva listened carefully. A few seconds later, the faint roar of distant thrusters reached them. She looked back at him with quiet interest. Your senses are adapting faster than expected. Elias folded his arms proudly. I've always been a fast learner. The sound of the approaching transport faded again as it changed course toward the battlefield. They resumed walking. Eventually, the dunes opened into a wide valley surrounded by jagged alien rock formations. Elias looked around. This place feels old. It is, Sylva said. Older than the war? Much older. Elias studied the strange structures carved into the stone cliffs. Ancient metallic towers rose between the rocks, their surfaces covered with glowing alien symbols. Let me guess, he said. This is where you live. One of our outposts. Elias whistled softly. Well, he said, this is significantly nicer than the human military barracks. Sylva stepped toward a tall metallic door embedded in the rock. The symbols on the wall flickered to life as she approached. Elias leaned closer to examine them. Please tell me this place has food, he said. Sylva placed her hand against the glowing panel. It does. Elias sighed with relief. Excellent. The heavy door slowly slid open with a deep mechanical hum. Warm light spilled out from the interior. Sylva stepped inside. Elias followed her. After 2 steps, he suddenly stopped. Sylva turned. What is wrong now? Elias blinked. I just realized something. What? He pointed at her. You turned me immortal without asking first. Sylva looked genuinely puzzled. You were dying. That's true, Elias admitted. He rubbed his chin thoughtfully. But normally immortality involves paperwork. Sylva stared at him. What is paperwork? Elias smiled slightly. Trust me, he said. You saved me from the worst part of human civilization. Warm light filled the interior chamber as the heavy door closed behind them with a deep metallic thud. The space inside the outpost was far larger than Elias expected. Smooth silver walls curved upward into a vaulted ceiling where long strips of soft blue light glowed like artificial starlight. Elias stepped forward cautiously, looking around with open curiosity. "Well," he said, "this is significantly nicer than the tent I was sleeping in yesterday." Sylva walked calmly across the room as if she had returned to a place she knew well. "This outpost has been here for 200 years, she said. Elias blinked. 200? Yes. Humans would have turned it into a museum by now. Sylva stopped beside a circular console embedded in the floor. As she approached, the surface lit up with alien symbols that shifted like flowing water. Elias leaned over the console and squinted at the glowing glyphs. "Let me guess," he said. "This controls the secret alien superweapons." "It controls the kitchen." Elias looked impressed. "That's honestly even more important." Sylva pressed several symbols and a quiet mechanical hum moved through the walls. Somewhere deeper in the structure, machinery began waking up after long dormancy. Elias wandered slowly through the chamber, studying everything with growing fascination. His new senses picked up subtle vibrations in the structure. The low pulse of power conduits inside the walls, the distant whisper of air circulators hidden in the ceiling. "You know," he said thoughtfully, "I can hear the building breathing." Sylva glanced at him. "It is regulating atmosphere." "That's still breathing," Elias insisted. He walked toward a wide window carved into the far wall. Outside, the desert valley stretched under the rising silver moon of Kareth 9. The battlefield was now far beyond the ridges, hidden by darkness and distance. Elias crossed his arms and leaned against the window frame. "So," he said, "I have a question." Sylva was examining another console nearby. "You have asked many questions already." "Yes, but this one is important." She looked up. "What is it?" Elias gestured at himself. "Why me?" Sylva did not answer immediately. The machines inside the outpost continued to hum quietly as dormant systems returned to life. "You were dying," she said. "That part has been mentioned," Elias replied, "but there were probably hundreds of dying soldiers out there." "Yes. And yet you picked the sarcastic one lying next to a broken truck." Sylva studied him carefully. "You accepted death." Elias shrugged. "That's what happens when your lungs sound like broken engines." "You did not beg." "I considered it," Elias admitted, "but it seemed undignified." Sylva looked away for a moment. "My kind rarely forms blood bonds." Elias turned toward her. "How rarely?" "Sometimes centuries pass without one." Elias raised his eyebrows. "So statistically speaking, this was a very strange day." "Yes." He thought about that. "And you just happened to choose a human soldier who makes bad jokes under life-threatening circumstances." Sylva crossed her arms. "You were calm." Elias smiled slightly. "That's because I assumed I was about to die." The room grew quiet again. Then suddenly Elias flinched. He grabbed his side. "Ow!" Sylva immediately looked at him. "What happened?" "You tell me," Elias said. "You're the one who keeps injuring me." Sylva glanced down at her hand. A small burn mark had appeared on her palm where she had touched an overheated console panel. "It was minor," she said. Elias pointed accusingly at her. "Your definition of minor is extremely inconvenient." Sylva folded her arms again. "You healed instantly." "That's not the point," Elias said. "The point is that now every time you bump into furniture, I'm going to feel it." Sylva seemed mildly annoyed. "I do not frequently bump into furniture." Elias pointed toward the doorway they had just entered. "You walked into that door earlier." The door opened too slowly. "That is not how doors work." Sylva ignored him and walked toward a long metallic table where several storage containers were beginning to unlock. Elias followed. Inside one of the containers rested several sealed food packs and two transparent cylinders filled with glowing liquid. Elias stared at them. "Please tell me that's soup." "It is nutrient concentrate." "That sounds less exciting than soup." Sylva handed him one of the cylinders. Elias examined it carefully. "If this turns me into something with extra arms," he said, "I'm going to be very disappointed." "It will not." He drank it cautiously. The taste was surprisingly pleasant, something between fruit and clean mineral water. Elias blinked. "Okay," he admitted. "That's actually good." Sylva opened her own container. They stood there in the quiet alien outpost, drinking glowing nutrient concentrate while the desert wind whispered outside the stone walls. After a moment, Elias spoke again. You know something strange? Sylva looked up. What? Elias leaned back against the table. 2 hours ago, I was dying on a battlefield. Yes. Now I'm apparently immortal and sharing alien soup with someone who accidentally tied her lifespan to mine. Sylva considered that. Yes. Elias nodded thoughtfully. Well, he said, this might be the strangest evening of my life. Sylva watched him for a long moment. Then she said quietly, for me as well. The night on Kareth 9 grew deeper as the silver moon climbed higher above the desert valley. Inside the outpost, the lights had dimmed to a quiet glow, and most of the ancient systems had settled into a steady rhythm that sounded almost like a sleeping machine. Elias stood near the wide observation window again. The desert stretched endlessly beyond the glass. Somewhere far away, the battlefield still existed, but from here it felt like a distant memory rather than the place where his life had almost ended. He held the empty nutrient cylinder in one hand and turned it slowly between his fingers. Immortal, he murmured. The word still sounded strange. Behind him, Sylva sat quietly at the central console. The glowing symbols reflected faintly in her dark eyes as she monitored the outpost's long dormant systems coming fully online. Elias glanced back at her. You know, he said, most people process life-changing events with at least one dramatic speech. Sylva looked up. What kind of speech? I don't know, Elias said. Something about destiny or fate. Maybe a monologue about the meaning of life. Sylva considered this. My people prefer silence. Elias nodded slowly. That's probably healthier. He turned back toward the desert again. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The quiet between them felt less awkward now, less like the uneasy pause between strangers. Finally, Elias broke the silence. So, he said, we should probably talk about the next few centuries. Sylva tilted her head slightly. Yes. Elias raised a finger. First question. She waited. Are your people going to be upset that you turned a random human soldier into an immortal? Sylva thought about that. Possibly. Elias sighed. Good. I was worried this situation might be too simple. Sylva stood and walked toward the window beside him. The long ears that marked her alien heritage caught the pale moonlight. My kind does not often choose blood bonds, she said quietly. Elias crossed his arms. That part I understood. For many of my people, centuries pass alone. Elias looked at her. And you didn't want that. Sylva did not answer immediately. Outside, the wind moved slowly across the dunes, reshaping the sand the way time reshaped lives. I have watched many companions die, she said finally. Elias studied her expression. For someone who lives several centuries, he said, that must get exhausting. Yes. They stood in silence again. Then suddenly Elias winced slightly. Okay, he said. Sylva frowned. What happened? Elias pointed at her arm. You just leaned on the edge of the console. Sylva looked down. The metal corner had pressed slightly into her elbow. It did not hurt. Well, I felt it, Elias said. So from now on, please avoid aggressive furniture. Sylva blinked slowly. You are complaining about shared pain. Yes. You healed instantly. That's not the point, Elias replied. The point is that now my personal safety depends on your coordination. Sylva looked mildly offended. My coordination is excellent. You tripped over a rock earlier. The rock was incorrectly placed. Elias smiled. Of course it was. The tension between them softened slightly. Elias leaned against the window frame again and looked at the stars. With his new senses, he could see them more clearly now. Countless distant systems scattered across the dark sky. For the first time, he understood something he had never fully grasped as a human soldier. Time. There was suddenly so much of it. You know, he said quietly, before today, my entire plan for the future was surviving the week. Sylva listened. Now I apparently have centuries to figure things out. Yes. Elias scratched the back of his neck. That's a lot of planning. Sylva studied him carefully. You are not afraid? Elias thought about that question. Then he shook his head. No, he said. Why? Elias smiled faintly. Because if I'm going to spend the next few centuries figuring out how immortality works, He gestured toward her. At least I won't be doing it alone. Sylva looked at him for a long moment. The bond between them pulsed faintly beneath the surface of their thoughts, quiet but unmistakable. Two lives, one connection. Finally, she nodded once. You will adapt, she said. Elias exhaled slowly and looked back at the endless desert. Well, he said, I survived a war, accidentally became immortal, and now I'm sharing pain with an alien warrior. Sylva raised an eyebrow. Yes, Elias smiled. I think I'm adapting already. Outside the outpost, the desert wind moved across the dunes, erasing the last traces of the battlefield far beyond the valley. And inside the quiet alien outpost, two very different lives, once separated by species, war, and time, began the long, uncertain journey of forever together.